On the morning of October 12, 1992, a light rain began to fall over the town of Embers Dell, a remote mining community tucked away in the folds of the Appalachian wilderness. It wasn't unusual for this part of West Virginia to wake under mist and cloud, but something about this rain felt wrong. It carried a strange warmth, and by midday, the drops turned thick, sticky, and rust-colored. The local AM station, KDEL 720, reported it as a peculiar iron-rich drizzle, urging residents to remain indoors. But by the time the broadcast looped for the third time, there was no one left in the station to hear it. By dusk, Embers Dell had vanished, not physically, but existentially. The post office ceased receiving mail. DMV records were blank. School transcripts and property deeds returned no such address. Relatives calling from nearby counties got only a dead tone. County maps printed after 1993 no longer showed Embers Dell. It wasn't marked as abandoned or evacuated. It simply wasn't there. The first official mention of the anomaly appears in a declassified FEMA internal memo dated November 3, 1992. It reads, in part, irregularity at coordinates, redacted continues. Recommend perimeter status unchanged. Suppress civilian access via natural disaster pretense. Contact maintained with Field Asset 117. That memo was discovered in 2008 by journalist Lena Corbin, who had submitted a FOIA request related to FEMA's disaster simulations in the early 90s. Corbin, who had grown up in the nearby town of Rockbridge, remembered Embers Dell. Her aunt had lived there. She recalled the town's annual harvest parade, the red iron arch above the old mine entrance, and the peppery scent of clay dust after summer storms. But when she returned home to gather testimony, something was wrong. No one in Rockbridge remembered Embers Dell, not her cousins, not her old schoolmates, not even her mother, who swore Lena had never had an aunt. Corbin's notes, later leaked via an encrypted blog, tell of her return to the site. The GPS showed nothing but forest, yet a narrow road, badly overgrown, broke the tree line. She walked it for over an hour. No towns, no structures, just silence. The air felt charged, like a place recently abandoned but never reclaimed. At one point, she claimed, it began to rain. And with the rain came ash, not white or gray, but crimson. She collected a sample in a mason jar and brought it to a chemist in Charleston. The analysis showed a high concentration of oxidized copper, trace manganese, and something else. Something not listed on any industrial chart. That same week, Corbin's blog was shut down. Her source at FEMA, known only as Ashcroft, stopped replying to encrypted messages. She was last seen checking into a motel near Flatwoods. Surveillance footage shows her entering her room. No footage shows her leaving. The idea that a town could be erased, not destroyed, but forgotten, traces back further than Embers Dell. Declassified CIA documents from 1977 detail Operation Quiet Bell, a proposed mind influence campaign using directed frequency arrays in rural areas to cause mass amnesia or altered memory formation. The program was shelved after a test in southeastern Oregon reportedly caused hallucinations, memory gaps, and the spontaneous disappearance of a small unincorporated township from state records. That township, incidentally, was named Dell's End. Its coordinates fall within 2 degrees of Embers Dell, but perhaps the strangest account comes from a shortwave radio enthusiast in Pennsylvania, who, in early 1993, picked up a repeating signal on an unused emergency band. The message, looped every 47 seconds, said, "You will not remember Ember. You were never here." He recorded it. The tape was sent to the FCC. The agency responded, stating no such frequency existed and encouraging the user to seek professional assistance. There are those who suggest Embers Dell never existed at all, that it's a product of misremembered towns, overlapping folklore, and conflated mining accidents. They cite the lack of birth records, the absence of contemporary news reports, and the vanishing of physical evidence as signs of hoax or delusion. But those arguments falter when you meet people like Jacob Grinnell, a retired coal geologist who insists he mapped veins running under Embers Dell in 1986. He still has the charts, though the topography no longer matches satellite imagery. There was a slope, an access tunnel, 2 ventilation shafts, he told a college reporter in 2009. Now it's just solid ground, like someone drew new land over it. What happened in Embers Dell, if it happened, was not an isolated event. That's the theory posited in a 2011 paper by Dr. Charles Reeve, a former NSA cryptologist turned fringe theorist. He argues that Embers Dell was part of a larger pattern of what he calls dimensional occlusions, locations that undergo temporary or permanent shifts in perceptual or administrative existence. His evidence includes weather anomalies, changes in migration patterns, and discrepancies in national census data. The paper was published in a low-circulation journal and quietly retracted 2 months later. But the rain continues. Every few years, hikers in the Monongahela forest report sudden crimson showers, localized and brief. Park rangers dismiss them as iron-rich stormwater runoff. Yet satellite imagery shows no clouds overhead at the time. And in 3 separate instances, hikers who reported the rain were later diagnosed with transient global amnesia, a condition so rare it affects fewer than 0.002% of the population. They couldn't remember the hike, or where they'd been. Only that, for a moment, it had rained, and it wasn't water. In the early winter of 1993, just months after the disappearance of Embers Dell, a freight train derailed near the now erased coordinates. The incident was buried in local papers, blamed on icy tracks and mechanical failure, but buried within Norfolk Southern's internal incident report was a peculiar note. The engineer, Harold Reeves, claimed he had seen a blinking red light in the woods, like a signal tower where there shouldn't be one. His statement ends abruptly, mid-sentence, followed by a handwritten addendum: "Do not pursue this line of inquiry." Reeves retired the following week and refused all interviews until his death in 2007. His daughter later recounted that he used to have nightmares, waking up whispering, "We weren't supposed to see it." That same winter, a strange notice circulated through the West Virginia State Emergency Services Office. Labeled "Exercise Document Only," it described a simulated evacuation drill for a town named Eldrum, populated by 231 residents. The name was unfamiliar, but the demographics matched the 1990 census for Embers Dell. Several employees noted the error, but the document was quickly retracted with a follow-up memo stating that Eldrum was an internal test case with no bearing on real locations. Yet linguistic analysts have since pointed out that Eldrum is a near anagram for Ember Dell. Around this time, a series of reports began surfacing from amateur cartographers using early GIS mapping tools. A blank region, forest, according to satellite scans, showed elevation inconsistencies. One 3D topography scan produced in late 1993 displayed a symmetrical depression in the terrain, roughly circular, 0.8 miles across, 300 feet deep. But when the same area was scanned again a month later, the depression was gone. Trees, hills, contours, all had returned to expected pattern. It was as if the land had healed or been rewritten. And then came the birds. Beginning in spring 1994, bird watchers from the Appalachian Ornithological Society documented mass directional errors in local migration. Flocks of robins and thrushes were observed flying in slow spirals over the region formerly known as Embers Dell. One observer described the movement as a confused orbit, like they couldn't remember where to land. Their instruments malfunctioned. GPS loggers recorded corrupted coordinates. One report suggested that birds were navigating based on magnetic memory, and that something in the area was subtly erasing that memory mid-flight. Adding to the growing folklore was the emergence of an audio tape known as the Mercer signal. Allegedly recorded by a retired park ranger named Lowell Mercer in 1994, the tape was never aired publicly but circulated in bootleg form among cryptographers and signal specialists. It contains 2 minutes of static followed by a low droning hum that oscillates every 13 seconds. Just before the end of the recording, a voice whispers what sounds like, "Return the names." Linguistic experts have debated the phrasing for years, though some believe the cadence matches regional dialects spoken near the original mine. The voice's origin has never been identified. No one knows what happened to Mercer. He reportedly vanished during a hiking trip in the Tygart Valley River Basin later that same year. In 1995, a former FEMA contractor under a protective pseudonym, Red Leaf, emailed an encrypted confession to a fringe research forum hosted in Canada. In his message, he detailed the use of geological broadcast nodes buried beneath test towns during a classified 1980s program named Blue Morning. These nodes, he claimed, could emit frequency pulses that suppressed memory retention within a 5-mile radius. The technology had been experimental, used in only one confirmed field test in 1992. He named the town Embers Dell. The post was removed within 48 hours. Redleaf's account was deleted. Forum backups of the thread were corrupted. What remains is a partial text capture retrieved by the Wayback Machine. Enough to fuel speculation, enough to terrify those who still remembered. Some locals in nearby counties began reporting dreams, not memories, dreams. Always the same, standing in the rain as it turned to ash, watching buildings dissolve into red dust, hearing voices call out from nowhere. They described an overwhelming sadness, the sense of forgetting someone you once loved but can no longer name. These dreams were dismissed by psychiatrists as mass suggestion, possibly triggered by local folklore or media rumors. But in at least 6 cases, patients drew identical maps in their therapy journals, maps with a red dot in the woods marked only by one word: home. Then, in late 1996, construction crews digging a foundation for a cell tower discovered a buried object beneath 3 feet of clay. It was a bell, iron, corroded, but intact. The engravings were faint but legible. Town Hall, Embers Dell, Eastern 1881. Before officials could transport it to a regional museum, it disappeared. The site was cordoned off and declared unstable due to a pocket collapse. No further explanation was offered. The museum director who had first confirmed the find resigned unexpectedly 2 days later. His resignation letter contained only a single line: "We rang it, and no one came." In January 1997, a Freedom of Information request filed by researcher Paul T. Winslow unearthed a peculiar document misfiled in the U.S. Geological Survey archives. It was labeled Subsurface Abnormality, Site 23A, dated 1989. The coordinates pointed to a stretch of land now designated as restricted forestry east of Route 53, the rough area once associated with Embers Dell. The document included seismic readings from a borehole analysis. For 40 feet, the ground behaved normally, dense clay and slate. But at precisely 41 feet, the readings dropped into negative values, suggesting either an instrumentation failure or a void that registered colder than its surroundings. In a red margin note, an analyst wrote, "As if something was pulling heat inward." Winslow attempted to visit the coordinates in March of that year. According to the field report he submitted to his university's Department of Geography, the area was surrounded by a newly constructed chain-link fence bearing no federal or state markings. Unmarked white utility trucks were parked along the access road. He was turned away by a man in a dark green windbreaker who refused to show identification. Winslow's car was followed for 37 miles on his return journey. A week later, he withdrew from his PhD program and moved out of state. He has not spoken publicly since. In 1998, a former military communications technician named Bradley Qualls shared a story during an anonymous call-in to a late-night conspiracy radio show based out of Knoxville. He claimed that in late 1992, while stationed at an undisclosed site in Virginia, he monitored a repeating emergency broadcast from a sister installation in the Appalachian Corridor. The broadcast, never aired publicly, was routed internally through military comms. It included a rotating series of alerts, but one phrase stood out: "Do not attempt to remember." The warning played hourly for 8 consecutive days. When Qualls asked his superior what it meant, the answer was chillingly bland. Sometimes things work too well. The host dismissed the story as fiction, but within a month, the station received an FCC audit for unauthorized signal amplification. The episode, along with several others from that period, was erased from the station's archive logs. Qualls was never heard from again. By 1999, local folklore around Embers Dell reached a new height. Teens dared each other to hike into the hills looking for the invisible town. A now-lost camcorder tape surfaced briefly on a regional message board. Shot at night, the footage shows 3 individuals walking through dense woods. Around the 14-minute mark, static overtakes the audio. The screen begins to flicker. In the final frame before the tape cuts out, the silhouette of a steeple can be seen through the trees, blackened, warped, and half sunk into the hillside. The uploader claimed the tape was mailed to them anonymously. Within days, the post was deleted and the site domain, redflicker.net, vanished from Wachoi's records. Then came the 2001 flood. Heavy rains caused a creek near the presumed location of Embers Dell to breach its banks. Among the debris washed into nearby tributaries were charred beams, rusted signage, and an oilcloth bundle containing photographs. The images, developed on Kodachrome stock dated 1987, show ordinary scenes: a town square, a grocery storefront labeled Carrick's General, and a parade with a banner reading Harvest Jubilee. What unsettled analysts, however, was that each photo, regardless of framing, showed the same red ash falling from a cloudless sky. The ash doesn't blur or streak. It appears static, frozen midair. A chemist analyzing the residue claimed it lacked any organic content. "It's not ash," she wrote in her report. "It's pigment, as if someone painted the air." The photos were submitted to the Smithsonian for authentication. They were declared fraudulent, though no evidence of manipulation was ever found. The oilcloth bundle was stored briefly in a regional museum before it, too, disappeared during renovations. No inventory paperwork exists. The museum's director died unexpectedly in 2003 of an aneurysm while giving a lecture on regional folklore. In 2004, an unmarked envelope arrived at the editorial offices of the Charleston Chronicle, a regional newspaper with no prior involvement in the Embers Dell story. It contained a single sheet of faded yellow paper. Typed in courier font were 4 words: "Your archives are incomplete." On the reverse side, in what appeared to be red crayon, was a child's drawing of a house on fire. Above it hovered a black oval. No return address, no fingerprints. The Chronicle never published the story, but a scanned image of the letter leaked online, sparking renewed interest among fringe researchers. That same year, a pattern began to emerge. Cross-referencing FEMA records, railroad maintenance logs, and Forest Service permits from 1992 to 1995 revealed at least 6 instances where access routes near Embers Dell were closed under ambiguous pretenses: sinkholes, fallen trees, weather instability. Yet meteorological data from those days shows clear skies and no seismic activity. When mapped chronologically, the closures form a rough spiral expanding outward over 3 years. Some have speculated it was an attempt at containment. Others believe the spiral marks the edge of a growing absence, an expanding zone of forgetfulness, slowly erasing more than just memory. In early 2005, a doctoral student at the University of Virginia named Sylvia Harrow was conducting research into unincorporated towns for her thesis on Appalachian dissolution, the vanishing settlements of the Mountain South. During her search through archived property and tax records, she stumbled upon a microfilm roll misfiled under Mining Failures 1960s. Within it was a folder labeled ED Asset Conversion Pending. It contained several faded forms with government headers blacked out, referencing land reallocation, population displacement grants, and a line item labeled Anthropological Reversal Protocol Initiated. Harrow copied the file. She emailed a scanned PDF to her thesis advisor that evening. 2 days later, she was found unconscious in her apartment, surrounded by burned printouts. She had no memory of her research topic or why she had been studying it. The copy of the file vanished from the university server. In late 2006, a freelance surveyor named Elston Grady filed a formal complaint to the West Virginia Department of Highways. He claimed the forest trail where he had been hired to measure land boundaries led to a sudden, inexplicable drop, a crater that shouldn't be there. Grady's photographs, which he attached to the report, show something more disturbing: a black scar in the landscape, circular and smooth, its edges too perfect, too symmetrical to be natural. In the final image, faint white lines curve across the basin in spirals, like growth rings on a tree, or perhaps ripples around something that never surfaced. No response was filed. A week later, the complaint was removed from the state's digital registry. Grady never received payment for the job. He later abandoned surveying altogether, claiming he didn't want to map what's already been forgotten. A deeper crack in the silence came from an unlikely source: a sermon. In 2007, a traveling preacher named Joseph Maddox delivered a fiery service in a small church in Boone County. The audio, recorded by a parishioner, included this cryptic line: "I walked in a place that God no longer sees, where the rain bleeds backward and the trees grow from memory alone." Congregants later claimed Maddox had gone off script, speaking in a voice not quite his own. He collapsed moments later. Paramedics could find no medical cause. He was hospitalized for 3 days and released, but never preached again. When asked about Embers Dell, he only shook his head. "That place," he whispered, "was edited." That word, edited, would appear again, this time in a heavily redacted Department of Energy document surfaced by a group of hobbyist declassifiers in 2009. The document, dated 1991, references territorial memory containment tests and lists Site 42A, marked only by grid coordinates. Those coordinates sit directly atop where Embers Dell should be. In a blacked-out margin, faintly legible under ultraviolet scan, was a sentence: "Subject regions demonstrate predictable self-redaction within 15-month windows post-event." The implications were staggering. Self-redaction? As though the land, the memories, the records were not merely suppressed, but erasing themselves. That same year, a retired postal worker named Alma Reese contacted a local historical society with a box of unsorted mail recovered from an old branch office in Rockbridge. It had been slated for demolition, but she had saved the mail as a curiosity. Inside were unopened envelopes, all addressed to Embers Dell residents. Dated between 1991 and 1992, dozens of them. Electricity bills, holiday cards, jury summons. The addresses were real, handwritten, postmarked, but never delivered. Some had been stamped, "Return to sender, no such town." Others bore no return information at all. Perhaps most chilling were the postcards. 3, in total, all postmarked the same day, October 11th, 1992. Each bore a photo of a hand-drawn scarecrow standing in a field of red corn, smiling under a rust-colored sky. The message on each was identical, scrawled in shaky script, "Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget." The society archived the cards. Within months, their local office suffered a fire. The archive room was the only one affected. More fragments surfaced over the years. A man hiking near Cheat River found what looked like a child's diary sealed in a freezer bag under a cairn of stones. Dated July 1992, the entries spoke of the red rain, the quiet people who whisper under the porch, and school windows that look out at nothing anymore. The diary vanished during transport to a university archive. A backup scan, retrieved from a damaged SD card, contains only one legible entry. "If you see the bell, don't listen. It rings things back." By 2010, amateur researchers and online investigators had begun to compile the fragments: news clippings, sightings, weather reports, unexplained seizures of land, records of vanished names. They dubbed it the Embers Dell discontinuity. A subreddit emerged, so did forums, podcasts, even a short-run zine titled Redfall. Each sought answers. Each, in time, splintered under pressure from disinformation, trolling, and internal paranoia. One by one, the platforms collapsed. Domains expired. Admins vanished. One user, known only as Nimin8, claimed, "They don't need to silence you. They just wait for the parts of you that remember to rot." No coordinated agency ever claimed responsibility. No press release ever acknowledged the town. No plaque was ever placed, no grave marked. Embers Dell slipped through every structure meant to preserve memory and place. But the rain continues to fall in red pockets, and every so often, someone remembers, only to forget again. In the spring of 2011, a cryptic update appeared in an obscure geological bulletin published by a university in upstate New York. It referenced a phenomenon of localized mineral inversion detected in remote soil samples taken from the Monongahela region. The inversion, where subsurface minerals appeared to be arranged in reverse chronological layers with newer formations buried beneath older, defied known geological processes. The author, a doctoral candidate named Vera Schultz, included sample coordinates, but in later editions, those numbers were redacted, not by the journal editors, but by request from an unnamed federal agency citing cartographic misrepresentation risks. Vera's paper was her last academic publication. Her LinkedIn account shows no professional activity after 2012. Her personal website once contained a photo of a coppery red field with the caption, "Where the past goes to rust." It is now a 404-page. A month later, hikers in a remote sector of the forest recorded a video that circulated briefly on encrypted forums. Shot on a thermal camera, it showed a clear humanoid figure walking across an open glade. But the heat signature behaved strangely, flickering in and out, as if it were superimposed from a different environment. One frame-by-frame analysis revealed what appeared to be a second set of footprints trailing the figure, only visible in ultraviolet. No animals, no insects, no ambient noise. Just a thick, red fog curling around the tree line like smoke trapped between dimensions. Then came the signal. In August 2012, A technician working night shift at the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center intercepted a repeating broadcast. The message, transmitted on a deprecated VLF channel last used during Cold War continuity of government drills, was only 23 seconds long. A man's voice, garbled but insistent, said, "We are the remainder. We are the echo. Do not answer the bell. Do not speak its name." The message looped 4 times before terminating mid-sentence. The technician, per protocol, flagged the incident and logged it into the communications archive. Within 3 days, that technician was transferred without explanation. The log entry was scrubbed from the digital system, but a printed slip, later smuggled out, bore a curious red stamp: Resonance Zone C. Independent researchers fixated on that phrase. What was a resonance zone? Archived NASA ionospheric surveys from the early 1990s show a faint irregularity in electromagnetic behavior over that section of Appalachia, specifically in the 3.7–4.1 Hz band, often associated with subconscious influence and memory encoding. Later studies suggested these anomalies intensified during storms, especially in areas with high copper concentrations. Embers Dell, as recorded in pre-erasure geological charts, sat on the largest exposed copper seam east of the Mississippi. Notably, in September 2013, a small local paper, the Greenbrier Sentinel, ran an article titled "Ash from Nowhere." The story covered a sudden downpour of red particulates over several square miles. The accompanying photo showed a farmhouse porch dusted with scarlet powder. The homeowner, a woman in her 80s, said simply, "It's back again. The sky's bleeding." 3 days later, the Sentinel published a retraction claiming the incident was the result of pollen misidentification and photo manipulation. The reporter who wrote the piece resigned shortly after. Her final tweet, now deleted, read, "We are all one storm away from forgetting." That same year, drone footage taken by wilderness surveyors showed a clearing deep in the forest with odd concentric furrows in the ground, resembling crop circles but carved into the soil. When investigators hiked to the location days later, the clearing was gone. Trees stood where there had been none. The soil bore no trace of disturbance. The footage, however, remains, and so does the audio picked up by the drone mic, a faint bell chime, distant and underwater, followed by static. Some now believe Embers Dell was not the first event of its kind, but part of a recurring pattern. Ancient records from Shawnee and Monoton oral histories speak of the red breath, or blood rain, falling before the land sleeps. These stories describe a village that vanished into smoke where no fire had burned, and a bell that rings where time does not flow. Anthropologists once dismissed these as mythological accounts of disease or famine, but recent comparisons by linguist Mariel Tanis suggest the dialect words used to describe the red rain bear no known Indo-European roots. One of them, Eslamar, loosely translates as "to forget by force." And perhaps, most haunting of all, a child's drawing mailed anonymously to a local fire department in 2014. It showed a playground under stormy skies, children frozen in place, faces blank. In the sky, small, almost missed, was a single line of block letters. We came home and it was gone. There was no return address, no name, just the picture. And on the back, in red crayon, "Do you remember the bell?" In 2015, a private security contractor, hired by a timber company expanding logging rights near the restricted Monongahela sectors, filed an unusual incident report. The document, leaked to an underground information-sharing network, described a team of 4 encountering what was initially believed to be an abandoned church. It stood alone in a clearing surrounded by oak and pine, its wood charred black but untouched by fire. The doors were open. No wildlife stirred nearby. Inside, everything was dustless: benches, hymnals, altar, all pristine. On the pulpit sat a small metal bell. When one of the contractors rang it, he collapsed. Not from a seizure or trauma, but from silence. That's how the report described it. The silence pushed him down. He awoke moments later, unable to recall his own name. Over the next week, all 4 members of the team reported nosebleeds, migraines, and recurring dreams of a town where the sky flickered like static and the rain clung to their skin in red streaks. They were pulled from the site. The area was marked environmentally unstable and off-limits. The logging project was quietly canceled. Later that year, a software engineer at a defense contractor in Maryland flagged an anomaly during archival server maintenance. The digital index of the U.S. Geological Survey showed phantom entries for structures and topographical features not listed on any current maps. These included Red Ridge Mine Shaft B, Carrick Square, and Dell Municipal Bell House. All carried creation timestamps from 1991-1992, and all had been auto-deleted in early 1993. The metadata pointed to a now-defunct division of the NSA, Project Halberd, a program believed to have experimented with embedded memory suppression via distributed digital systems. The engineer, who posted anonymously about his discovery, signed off with the words, "They didn't delete it. They buried it in time." The post lasted less than 12 hours before deletion. Public sightings increased. In 2016, during a controlled burn by the U.S. Forest Service, a Ranger helicopter observed what appeared to be a small grid of paved streets briefly emerging through the smoke. The pilot captured several low-resolution photos before the haze obscured the view. One image, later authenticated by independent analysts, showed a row of concrete foundations laid out in a semicircle. At the edge of the frame was a rusted sign, toppled over. Enhancements revealed partial lettering, ERS Dell, POP 214. Officials later stated the image was doctored. The pilot was reassigned. The controlled burn area was sealed and planted over with non-native vegetation within a month. Around the same time, a new voice emerged on ham radio frequency 13.78 MHz. It broadcast only at night, intermittently, and only within a 15-mile radius near the suspected coordinates. The transmission opened with a slowed-down rendition of "Wayfaring Stranger," followed by spoken words in a female voice. The messages varied, but all shared a similar theme. You were here, you left, they stayed, it rains and they sleep, you forgot the price. Dozens of amateur operators recorded the broadcasts. Most were garbled, layered with static and distortion. A few transcripts were posted online, only to be deleted by users who later claimed they never posted them at all. That same year, a retired federal archivist named Dr. Bernice Ailstrom published a monograph titled The Geography of Red. Ostensibly a poetic meditation on forgotten places, it included a chapter referencing the hollow bell of Ember's shadow. When interviewed on a small university podcast, she said, "There are places that go quiet not because they are empty, but because they have learned how to forget themselves." She died of heart failure 2 months later. At her estate auction, one item was removed by agents claiming to represent the Department of the Interior. Bidders recall it was a large sealed frame labeled only Memory Map 1992. In 2017, a short-lived documentary project titled Dust in the Pines attempted to investigate the Embers Dell mystery. Its producer, Tessa Vaught, spent 2 years compiling testimonies, geological records, and field footage. The final version was never aired. According to leaked internal notes, Vaught's crew experienced a series of breakdowns during editing. Drives malfunctioned. Interview footage would not sync. Field audio was described as layered with voices that weren't there. In the last surviving clip, A drone camera catches something in the woods, a distant standing figure with no visible features, motionless amid falling red flakes. No crew member recalled seeing it in person. Vaught abandoned the project. In her final blog post, she wrote, "It's not a place, it's a wound that learned how to hide, and now it's remembering." That phrase would appear once more in the margins of a book returned to a small library in Elkins, West Virginia. The book, a 1986 local history volume that included Embers Dell in its chapter index. In the current copy, the town is missing, torn out, scraped away, replaced by blank space. But scrawled in the final page in blue pencil were those same words. It's remembering. No one had checked out the book in over 20 years. The return slip bore no name. In early 2018, an anonymous upload to a dark web server titled Only Reintegration Log 0 surfaced briefly among fringe archivist communities. It appeared to be a transcript of an internal interview between two government personnel, designations redacted, regarding Subject Zone E Delta. The language was clinical, technical, and dispassionate, but certain phrases stood out. "We've observed partial memory return in peripheral residents, containment barrier at 61% stability, and most chillingly, bell tones no longer restricted to origin site." The file was flagged by multiple nodes as a likely hoax until metadata confirmed it had originated from a secure DoD terminal range. Within 72 hours, the server hosting it vanished without warning. So did 3 of the users who had archived it. That same spring, hikers discovered a peculiar mound near the old Pine Hollow logging road, an area long rumored to be close to Embers Dell, though no one could define what that meant. The mound, circular and unnaturally symmetrical, was covered in bright red moss. Beneath it, stone. Not natural rock, but cut and shaped. A slab, with an inscription eroded by time and ash. A rubbing of the text was preserved and later analyzed by 2 independent cryptographers. The message? "This land forgets so we don't have to. Do not unbury the bell." Days later, a local radio station, WXEH 90.4 FM, suffered a blackout. When the signal returned, it played only static for 4 hours before abruptly airing a child's voice humming "Ring Around the Rosie." The transmission terminated without explanation. The FCC labeled it a malfunction due to signal drift from outdated equipment. The station denied it had ever broadcast such content. More disturbing were the following week's reports. 3 children from neighboring towns were found sleepwalking along the tree lines near the site of the mound. When recovered, they all spoke the same phrase in unison. "We heard it. We heard the ring." Psychologists attributed the event to hysteria and shared delusion. The families later moved away. No further comment was given. By autumn 2018, strange weather patterns began to converge over the zone. Satellite meteorology picked up a recurring anomaly, an oblong formation of static cloud that would manifest, then vanish, without precipitation or atmospheric justification. Analysts nicknamed it the drift. When viewed in thermal imaging, the area beneath it displayed not heat, but absence. No data, no response, just black. The anomaly drew attention from a private aerospace startup conducting remote sensing trials. Their probe, launched over the region, recorded a spike in infrared echo, something reflecting from the ground that wasn't visible in the standard spectrum. The probe systems failed less than 90 seconds later. On recovery, all onboard footage had been overwritten with a repeating file, a still frame of a fog-shrouded church bell suspended mid-swing. Meanwhile, independent archivists tracking census records noticed a bizarre discrepancy. Between 1990 and 2020, the population of a cluster of nearby counties remained unnaturally stable, neither growing nor shrinking in any statistically expected way. The Census Bureau had no explanation. Local hospitals reported gaps in long-term patient records, particularly among elderly residents. In many cases, individuals had no birth certificates, no digital footprint, just handwritten notes referencing towns no one could verify. At least a dozen of these listed Embers Dell as their birthplace. Anomalies continued into 2019. A research vessel collecting samples along the Cheat River pulled up sediment that glowed faintly under UV light. Mixed in with natural debris were fragments of man-made materials, tiles, ceramic, charred glass. One shard bore the partial imprint of a logo, a stylized flame surrounded by wheat. That emblem matches early 20th century designs for the Embers Dell Harvest Festival, an event documented only in a single surviving newspaper from 1938, now considered apocryphal by mainstream historians. And then there was the tape. Unearthed from a second-hand shop in Parkersburg, the unlabeled VHS cassette contained only 15 minutes of static and warped sound before cutting to footage of a parade. The quality was poor, distorted, but visible among the crowd were children in costumes, adults waving, and behind them a banner. Embers Dell celebrates the living memory. The footage cuts to black. Then a final frame. A man standing alone in a field of red ash, staring up at the sky. A bell hangs beside him, but it's upside down and humming. The owner of the shop, asked about the tape, said only, "It was left in a box with a note that said, 'Return before the remembering.'" What does that mean? To some, Embers Dell is a psychic scar, a place too heavy with grief to be held in collective memory. To others, it is a test site, an abandoned experiment in suppressing consciousness and reshaping perception. But to those who still remember the red ash, the humming bell, and the town that faded not into ruin, but into omission, it is neither myth nor metaphor. It is waiting. In early 2020, a routine satellite sweep by a civilian weather imaging agency detected a perfect ring of barometric distortion stretching 6 miles across the Monongahela forest. The anomaly lasted just under 3 minutes before vanishing. The internal report, marked for further review, described the phenomenon as a localized atmospheric cavity, an event typically associated with underground detonations or rapid depressurization. But no seismic activity was recorded. No military exercises were scheduled. And the center of the ring, once mapped, aligned precisely with the last known coordinates for Embers Dell. Simultaneously, a string of power outages swept through the counties bordering the affected zone. Though attributed publicly to ice storms, local utility workers reported a surge anomaly that originated not in the grid but from the Earth itself, a ground pulse that tripped substations and melted copper coils. One technician reportedly went missing during a follow-up inspection. His truck was found a day later, engine running, cab empty. The only clue, a smeared red handprint on the driver's side window. Shortly after, an encrypted zip file appeared in the inboxes of 4 researchers known to study memory anomalies and temporal distortion. The sender was listed only as Trace. Within the file, a corrupted dot-wave audio labeled Bell 14X Final DEMP3, and a set of GPS coordinates pointing to a burned clearing deep in the forest. The audio, when cleaned and analyzed, revealed a 3-tone chime followed by 11 seconds of static, and then a voice, calm, female, and nearly a whisper. "The boundary is breathing now. You must not return again." 3 of the 4 recipients deleted the message and refused further contact with one another. The 4th, an experimental physicist named Eli Roosman, vanished 6 weeks later. His final blog entry read, "It's not about what we forgot, it's about what we left behind." The pandemic of that year caused a temporary lull in investigation, but anomalies did not cease. In October, a drone operated by a hobbyist mapping abandoned trails captured high-definition footage of a structure materializing over the course of 37 seconds. At first, nothing, then a shimmer, then, frame by frame, a building. A town hall, according to architectural comparisons, appeared at the edge of the tree line. No birds, no motion, just the structure, covered in red vines that pulsed faintly in the dusk light, and just as suddenly, it was gone. The footage glitched and restarted mid-flight. The drone operator, reviewing it later, had no memory of the event. "I didn't record this," he posted, "but my system says I did." Later that year, whispers emerged of a classified program within the Department of Energy titled Oracle Red. Internal leaks hinted at its purpose: not surveillance, not energy, but localized temporal excision remediation. Several documents reference prior test failures in non-compliant memory zones, with line items listing unrecoverable population assets and Bell Echo residuals. Though largely redacted, one phrase repeated several times: "Remembering is the trigger." That phrase, "remembering is the trigger," was found again in an unexpected place: a graffiti tag on an overpass just north of Route 53. Spray painted in thick red, it was discovered by a county cleanup crew in December 2020. Beneath the phrase was a crude image of a bell, cracked and bleeding. No other tags were present. The overpass surveillance feed went offline the night before. When reviewed, the backup tapes had been wiped clean, overwritten with a single white frame and the words "still ringing." By 2021, reports from across the state documented an increase in what neurologists termed episodic disassociation clusters. Patients described similar symptoms: sudden feelings of nostalgia for places they'd never been, missing time, and phantom memories of a town with brick streets and red-stained porches. Several claimed to have visited Carrick's store or mentioned the Jubilee Parade, despite no historical record of either place existing. One patient under hypnosis drew a near-perfect map of Embers Dell as it appeared in 1947. A team of researchers attempted to dismiss this as confabulation, until the map's coordinates aligned with now-buried infrastructure confirmed in declassified mining records. In March 2022, a Firewatch ranger monitoring the hills east of the restricted sector reported a glow in the trees. Believing it to be lightning or illegal camping, he approached. His final transmission, recorded at 2:12 a.m., is clipped and fragmented but includes this: "They're still inside. The houses are empty but not vacant. It's not the rain, it's them." He was found 3 days later, barefoot and dehydrated, 20 miles off course. He had no memory of transmitting anything. When played the recording, he began to cry, not from recognition, but from what he described as a sound I don't ever want to have known. Still, the bell rings. Witnesses describe hearing it only at dawn or dusk, only on overcast days, and only when alone. The chime does not carry through space but seems to resonate directly inside the skull, heavy, metallic, and slow, as if swung in a different timeline. Those who hear it are often marked by recurring dreams, sudden loss of childhood memories, or a craving for a place they cannot name. Many describe seeing ash fall where no fire has burned. What remains of Embers Dell may not be ruins, or ruins alone. It may be alive in ways we cannot map. A wound, a fold, a misremembered punctuation in the narrative of the land, bleeding red through every layer that tries to cover it. And now, the question is no longer whether the town was real. The question is, what happens when it remembers us back? In the spring of 2023, a low-frequency anomaly was detected by a research station in Kentucky monitoring Schumann resonances, global electromagnetic waves that resonate in the space between Earth's surface and the ionosphere. On April 17th, a sudden spike occurred, localized not globally, but to a narrow band across West Virginia. The anomaly lasted exactly 92 seconds. When mapped, the center of that resonance aligned precisely with the approximate center of the theoretical Embers Dell coordinates. It was as if something beneath the land had emitted a pulse, not sound, not light, but memory, folded into frequency. Within hours, amateur radio operators across the mid-Appalachian region reported interference, static breaking into whispers, shortwave bands looping back with recorded voices in reverse. One user recorded a clear phrase, repeated 3 times, "Not a ghost town, a ghost system." The file, uploaded to a Fringe Memory Studies forum, was shared over 3,000 times before the server hosting it was shut down due to unknown bandwidth strain. That same month, hikers posted videos of a peculiar visual phenomenon witnessed near Timber Hollow. Standing in one spot and filming northeast at dusk, they captured an effect akin to heat shimmer, but confined to a vertical seam in the forest air. The shimmer revealed, briefly, part of a structure, a window, old brick, a blackened weather vane. One man claimed he smelled wet clay and coal smoke, though nothing was burning nearby. In the final second of the video, a deep bell toll is faintly audible, distorted, but undeniable. Then, on May 3rd, the National Park Service issued an unpublicized notice to all regional rangers regarding unauthorized topographic anomalies. A whistleblower leaked the memo. The language was vague but hinted at a developing concern. Increased reports of non-standard structures, inconsistent trail geography, and variable tree age growth within Sector 14G. Personnel are advised not to investigate visually observed deviations without secondary confirmation. Attached was a grainy satellite image, time-stamped 2 days prior, showing a rectangular outline beneath the forest canopy. The file was labeled Carrick Square, Provisional. Parallel to these field reports, a researcher named Lena Shears published a brief digital paper in a defunct anthropology newsletter, making waves before being hastily pulled offline. Titled "The Culture That Faded Itself," the paper suggested that Embers Dell may have undergone a form of intentional cultural amnesia, a theorized event in which an entire society, under extreme pressure, attempts to forget itself into non-existence. Shears cited regional legends about sleeping towns, mentions of red rain in Appalachian folk ballads, and a strange spike in West Virginia's missing persons cases during the early 1990s. Disappearances the state never officially correlated. In her final paragraph, Shears asked, "What if Embers Dell was not erased by a government, but by its own people? What if memory is the containment?" Shears' university page was taken down within days. Her contact information vanished. The only remaining trace of her paper is an archived PDF titled simply Ember Echo 1 PDF. That summer, 3 children attending a forestry day camp near the supposed zone returned with sketches. Each child, without collaboration, drew the same image: a row of crooked houses, a crooked street, and a tall bell tower dripping red. One child wrote the word "home" in the corner. Their counselor dismissed it as a shared prompt or suggestion, but when parents were shown the drawings, several grew visibly disturbed. One mother fainted on the spot. She later confessed she had grown up somewhere in the hills, but could no longer remember the name of the place. She only remembered the smell of rust and the way the birds wouldn't land. Shortly after, a man posted anonymously to an encrypted board used by amateur urban explorers. He claimed to have found a manhole in the forest marked with embossed letters, E.D. Mooney, 1931. He lifted the cover and dropped a glow stick into the dark. It vanished into a void with no sound. He posted coordinates. 2 others responded that they had hiked the location and found no manhole, just flat ground, covered in red moss. On September 2nd, a freight train passing through nearby tunnels experienced a 4-minute radio blackout and onboard systems freeze. In the engineer's log, later leaked by a maintenance inspector, there was a handwritten note. Saw lights out the left tunnel. Looked like a town square lit by gas lamps. Wasn't possible. Tracks don't go there. GPS data showed the train had not deviated, but the footage from the cab dashcam was corrupted by red flickering lines. Throughout the fall, mental health centers in the region began reporting an uptick in cases diagnosed as dissociative realignment syndrome, a condition still not recognized by mainstream psychiatry. Patients described a recurring dream of waking up in a bed not their own, in a room filled with red dust, hearing a distant bell ringing backwards. Several attempted to draw maps from memory. Each map led back to a bend in the forest that no one could ever locate again. And then came the photos. In November, a storm uprooted a tree along a hiking trail south of Bowline Creek. Lodged between its roots was a tightly bound roll of Kodak film in a metal casing. When developed, it revealed snapshots of a town, quiet streets, gaslight lamps, a central fountain, and a group of people wearing masks. Not medical masks, but full porcelain faces, emotionless, like dolls. In one photo, they stood in rows, heads tilted toward a bell tower under a crimson sky. In another, a small child stood alone beneath a street sign, "Welcome back to Embers Dell." The film was authenticated. The camera model used hadn't been manufactured since 1988. The negatives vanished in transit to the state archive. But the image, once seen, doesn't easily fade. Some say they've started dreaming of that street. Others claim they've walked it once as a child. A few have started remembering the bell, not as a sound, but as an absence. Because it doesn't toll anymore. It waits. In February 2024, an unexplained broadband fluctuation was registered across multiple cellular networks in a tight radius near the Black Hollow sector of Monongahela. The event, officially dismissed as a signal routing failure, had a peculiarity that few insiders were willing to speak about. During the 46-minute window of interference, any GPS-activated device that attempted to route through the coordinates near the suspected site of Embers Dell was redirected to a black screen with a single phrase, "You have reached the forgetting." The log files of affected towers show no human override. Within a week, a state trooper responding to a missing persons report near the same area transmitted a garbled radio message before disappearing. Search teams recovered his cruiser by a dry creek bed. Its dash cam had captured footage of him exiting the vehicle, walking calmly into the woods. The last frame showed a faint red haze filtering through the trees and a figure standing on the edge of the road, unmoving. It wore what looked like a porcelain mask. No trace of the officer was ever found. His partner, who had remained behind to call in their position, was later hospitalized for acute memory loss. When asked who he was searching for, he replied, "Someone we left behind." In April, a meteorological drone operated by a university research team was deployed to measure soil erosion and canopy density in the forested hills southwest of the restricted region. Though launched in clear weather, the drone entered what appeared to be a sudden red rainfall zone. The team recorded 78 seconds of footage before the signal cut. When recovered, the drone's camera had been damaged, but its final telemetry stream included a brief audio snippet, a bell. But unlike previous recordings, this one contained layered harmonics, chords within chords, a droning resonance like overlapping realities vibrating through the same frequency. Acoustic analysts claimed it matched no known bell material and bore similarities to low-frequency infrasound events that have been linked to psychological disorientation and mass memory loss in closed environments. That month, the red moss returned. Park rangers reported new growth patterns forming concentric rings along a ridgeline thought to be near the edge of the resonance zone. No known species matched the moss's cellular structure. Under microscopic analysis, its spores contained double helix strands with unidentified coding sequences, part organic, part synthetic. One lab technician involved in the analysis resigned and left a note on their terminal. "It remembers in us." June brought an event that fractured the silence permanently. A boy was found wandering near the remains of an old railway line, barefoot and shivering, repeating one phrase: "I went to find the parade." He was placed in protective care. When questioned, he described streets of black brick, a red sky, and houses made of shadows. He said he saw people watching him through windows, but the windows were on the ground, and the people never blinked. His story would be easily dismissed, if not for what was found clutched in his hand: an iron key, hand-forged, engraved with one word: Carrick. Within days, a new file surfaced on a peer-to-peer encrypted net. It was titled Oracle Red Final Trigger Protocol. Its contents were fragmented: partial sentences, reference codes, flickering diagrams, but two lines stood out, repeating in bold: "Event Delta is a closed loop. If you hear the bell, you've already been there." The file had no origin signature. Within hours, it vanished from circulation, and then came the blackout. On September 11, 2024, all satellite feeds over the Monongahela sector dropped to static for precisely 6 minutes and 23 seconds. During that time, no flights passed overhead, no radio signals entered or left the region. When service resumed, dozens of motion-triggered cameras set up by wildlife biologists had been wiped, data replaced by a uniform red screen. A single frame survived in corrupted form, extracted weeks later. It shows a town square bathed in crimson ash. At its center, the bell tower. Upright now, reconstructed, ringing. No sound file survived. Those who have studied Embers Dell for decades agree on one point: something changed this year. It is no longer about searching for what was lost. The town, whatever force it embodies, is no longer hiding. It is calling. The rainfall has increased, quiet, warm, and the color of oxidized blood. Hikers, travelers, and locals speak of a soft chime at night, even indoors, even in dreams. Memories are blurring. Family photos lose faces. Land deeds list owners who do not exist. Children hum old songs with no known origin. And in some places, when the light is right, there is a shimmer in the trees. A gate, a curve in the air, a seam that wasn't there yesterday. The mystery of Embers Dell was never about what happened on that day in 1992 when the red ash fell and the town slipped from memory. It was about what it became when no one came to remember it. It did not die. It did not collapse. It reconfigured. It adapted. And now, it has remembered us. So the question lingers, unresolved and uneasy, like the taste of metal on the tongue after a thunderstorm. Was Embers Dell real? Or did they make it real by making us forget? Maybe it never existed. Or maybe, just maybe, we're all still living there. We just don't remember how to leave.